Welcome to the Becoming Baby Ready podcast, your podcast for queer family planning. My name is Sam, and throughout this podcast, you'll hear me have conversations with professionals who work alongside people who want to start and grow their families, as well as parents of intentionally created families. Everyone I speak to identifies as being part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. This is your opportunity to learn answers to questions you didn't even know you had. This week I have the opportunity to introduce you to Ravi and Dips, a pair of dads who have a beautiful baby girl, but it didn't come easy for them. They struggled, they navigated all kinds of hurdles, and now they have the gorgeous family that they have today. I can't wait for you to hear their story of family creation. Hey there, I just want to pop in with one more quick note before I let you listen to the conversation. Throughout our discussion, Ravi uses the phrase IVF, and for some people that means in vitro fertilization. In this case, what he's referring to is egg donation and egg retrieval. And so when you hear him say IVF, just know what he means is egg donation and egg retrieval. Welcome, everyone. Today, I have the opportunity to introduce you to Ravi and Dips, who are new dads to a beautiful wee baby. Welcome, the two of you. Please tell us about the members of your family and who you are.
Thank you for having us. My name is Ravi. I am dad to our little baby girl, Aviana.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Sam. My name is Dips, or Dipesh. And Aviana calls me Papa, and the reason for that is because I used to call my dad Papa Bear, and so I kind of wanted to take that name on.
And it's just the three of us right now. Hopefully, our family will expand a little bit more coming in the next few years. But yeah, she's been our little bundle of joy that we've been waiting for a while now. So.
She's a miracle baby.
Yeah.
She's adorable. She's absolutely adorable. And I will admit to listeners that I've had the opportunity to meet Ravi. I met Ravi before he became a dad, while he was still in the weeks leading up to it. So I've had the opportunity to sort of watch their parenting journey unfold before my very eyes, and it's so exciting to now have the chance to have you share your journey with listeners. Can you tell us, start from the beginning, how did the two of you meet? Where did you meet?
So I was actually visiting Canada. I had a wedding that I was attending, and then I love hiking. I love being outdoors. So I was on one of the apps and just wanted to see if anybody wanted to go on a hike, and happened to be this Prince Charming was waiting for his license to get transferred to Canada from the States, and we went. So we went we went to Blue Mountain, and we had a 2-hour car ride, and just everything seemed to click as to what our future families would look like, and in terms of what our goals were. And we are very different, mind you, but we really do complement each other. And from there, he kind of was planning to, on my return back, he was saying, "Oh, I'm actually going to England for a couple of months and doing like a Europe tour." And for a guy who doesn't take public transit that much, he actually took the train from London to where I lived, which was on like the southeast coast of England, every weekend to see me. And
Wow.
And yeah, kind of relationship blossomed from there.
Yeah, it was a coincidence that I met him in Canada, and then the week after he was leaving, I had a pre-planned trip to go to the UK for 2 months. So that kind of worked out, and yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, we just made it work by, making sure that we saw each other every few months. I also like a bit of a kind of what I call a trial of living in Canada for like 4 weeks and 6 weeks, and then kind of made my decision to move across the pond.
Yeah, and 6.5 years later, we're here now.
Wow. So lots have happened in 6.5 years. It's very serendipitous how you met then, with your love of hiking and being able to spend that time together at the beginning. It's interesting that you say, that initial car ride and having conversations about children and how you envision your life unfolding. it is something that I think is more common in the queer community than it is perhaps in other communities, in the cisgendered heterosexual communities, because they're always told to be worried about scaring someone away. Whereas in our community, we know if we're going to become parents, it's going to take some planning. It's not going to happen accidentally.
Yeah.
They're very intentional. So those conversations do typically start right from the very beginning. I need to know from the beginning, are you in on this family creation journey or not?
Yeah,
Because it's going to take some time and some money, right?
definitely.
I
Yeah.
mean, I learned my lesson from my previous relationship where we didn't have this discussion beforehand, and it kind of led to very differences in terms of what we wanted in life. So I kind of made sure that those important conversations are had much earlier on, so that we don't find ourselves falling in love and then we have this.
That
Having a child is a huge life-changing experience, and it's not for everyone. So I would never want to burden someone who doesn't want to have children, and so that was kind of important for me when we first met.
Yeah.
that's so true. It is not something that everyone wants. And truth be told, I've always said this. I have a lot of respect for people who say they don't want to have children,
Yeah.
because most of us have been programmed since we were young to assume that that will be our lives. And so it can be jarring for someone to hear someone else say, "Oh, I don't actually want to have kids." If you don't want them, then don't have them, because, that's just not your path. And that's okay to honor
Yeah,
who you are.
exactly. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. There are lots of different ways for our families to be created. The two of you chose the path you're on and had your daughter the way that you did. But can you tell us a little bit about the decision-making process? How did you decide how you would create your family?
Yeah, so originally, I think we had a vision in mind that we would try to mix our gene pool in a sense of getting Dip's older sister to donate her eggs to us, and then we would create embryos that way. But life likes to throw curveballs, and not everything goes as planned. So we had her fly in for the first time. This was a couple years back, January 2022, where she did the whole IVF protocol. She had to be away from her kids and her husband for 7 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because because she lives in the UK, so a lot of her screening tests and everything had to be done here in Canada, and so she was gone for a while, and then at the end, when we reached the final day, there was lots of eggs there, and unfortunately, because she had really high blood pressure at that time, 10 minutes before the extraction procedure, they had to cancel it, which was horrible. Very devastating to go through, especially 7 weeks of sacrifices from her and us, and time and money and everything just kind of spent on this. And to hear that, and to hear kind of your dreams just, go away like that with a blink of an eye was really, really tough on us. And then, we eventually, pulled through out of that, and we spoke to Depesh's sister again, and she said that she would be willing to give it another shot, but as long as it's not as long as what she had to do last time. And luckily, with the fertility clinic, because a lot of her screening was done, she only had to come back again, but for 2 weeks this time, which is still a sacrifice at the end. And so she did come back. We did do another IVF protocol. We received 10 embryos, but unfortunately, um, we had bad luck again. And after genetic testing, we ended up with a low level mosaic embryo, and the rest were abnormal out of the 10. And so we only had one embryo that had a very low chance of actually implanting. And so that was also really tough to hear. And I think at that time, we figured it was likely due to Depesh's sister being a little bit older, because the egg
Hmm.
quality does decrease with age, and so we did expect the outcome, but we didn't expect the outcome to be that. And so
Right.
um, at that time, we actually found matched with a surrogate independently, which was amazing. Um, but I'm glad that we listened to her advice at the time. She became a really good friend of ours and was just kind of following our journey until we were ready. And she did mention that she said, maybe this vision that you guys have of, you know, doing it this way may not work, and you may want to consider another avenue, such as an egg donor, and create embryos that way. So at the time, we discussed it, and because when you match with a surrogate, you want to make sure you have more than one embryo. Otherwise, surrogates won't really match with you because
Right.
kind of like, okay, one, and then you have to wait until more are created. So
Right.
at the time, we decided to do a known egg donor IVF, which worked out. And we had lots of embryos from that, which was great. And then we tried. The story doesn't get better, unfortunately.
Oh,
There isn't a happy ending yet, but we know ultimately there will be.
there will be. Right.
So after with our first surrogate, we tried 4 times. We tried, the first time was the embryo that we had from Depesh's sister, and that didn't work. And then we tried 3 more times, and we tried 2 embryos each time as well. And we did everything we could. We even added all of the, added protocols to try to make the embryo transfer work better, and it just failed each time. Unfortunately, until we switched doctors, that doctor didn't want to transfer again because she noted that there was fluid consistently in the ultrasounds, and so she did a biopsy, and they found out that our surrogate had endometritis, and it was an infection of the uterus the whole time that didn't allow any of those embryos to actually implant. So yeah, and then that was really
Wow.
hard to hear. Yeah, and it was very difficult for us to kind of hear that after trying, so many times. And ultimately, our surrogate and friend at the time what's that? It was saying that she needs a break, and it's tough for her, and we
Sure.
completely understand.
Yeah.
4 transfers is a lot, and she really gave it her best, and just wasn't meant to be at the time. So that's what we kind of tell ourselves when we reflect on things, and
maybe it just wasn't the time
wasn't the time
for
us.
us.
Yeah.
Right.
In the moment when you're spending a lot of money with transfers and IVF, you do feel a little bit defeated at that point.
Sure.
And we did actually. I think it was springtime, and we reflected on, like, I think we should take a break from this because it was. I think for our mental health, we needed it, and for our relationship as well, because it was
100%.
with him being a physician, he is a little bit more invested in understanding. He understands the protocols, he understands the medical side, and I could see how it was affecting him as well.
Sure.
And we both sat down. We're like, let's just take a break. It's also good for him to kind of just enjoy the summer and reset and reset. And so we took that time to reset, and also allowed our surrogate at the time to allow her body to kind of hopefully flush away everything, because it was a lot of injections, a lot of medications, lots of different protocols.
Antibiotics, yeah.
It really was a lot on her body, and she has a family too, so we didn't want to affect her family dynamics too. So we did that, and then I think it was September where we kind of then looked at what our next steps were, and we spoke to our surrogate at the time. Unfortunately, things didn't work out. She was moving. She moved up north, and so she wasn't sure whether she could, with our clinic being in Toronto, whether it was something she wanted to continue with. So she was very open and honest. She says, if you guys want to look for another surrogate, feel free to. And then Again, thanks to Ravi and his activeness in terms of reaching out to surrogates, through various channels. We managed to secure who we call our guardian angel.
Right.
Came and she's absolutely amazing, very hands off. I think Ravi's had a much more easier experience with this in terms of not having to follow up and check in too much. She's very independent and she's very, very experienced as a surrogate. And I think that's something we wanted as well, because someone who knows their body and what has worked on them in the past hopefully leads to greatest chances of success. And thankfully that did eventually happen. And then we did do a second round of IVF with our egg donor, just to make sure we had enough embryos. And
we did run out. Yeah, because we did run out because of all of the double embryo transfers that we did. And so we did actually have to do a fourth one, but it was good we did, because we ended up matching with our second surrogate, aka our guardian angel, because she's just amazing. And we thought, honestly, we were looking at every avenue out there. We interviewed almost 5 or 6 different surrogacy agencies. We were looking at Mexico and going abroad for surrogacy. So we actually learned a lot through that process. And I said to Dips, I said, you know what, I'm going to try one more time to just put our story out there on the surrogacy Facebook groups and see if, because on the Facebook groups, you're not allowed to message any surrogate. So I never reached out to anyone. It was actually, you have to wait for potential surrogate to match and message you. So I just posted our story out there. I was like, let's see what happens. We've interviewed 5 or 6 agencies. If we don't match, we'll go through an agency or go to Mexico. And so coincidentally, a week later, I got a message from our second surrogate, and we hit it off. We were texting and chatting for hours on end, just about random things. And she was like, I mainly do this to kind of help first-time parents become parents. And she's helped, I think, 4 or 5 couples before us as well. And so she said she was in retirement, but when she saw our post, she came out of retirement just for us. So, which has been amazing and such a blessing.
That is so great.
So yeah, we tried. It took us 2 transfers. The first transfer didn't work. Unfortunately, it did result in a miscarriage, an early miscarriage, but the second transfer did work, and we were extremely happy. And now we have Aviana, so it's been amazing since.
That's fantastic. I want to talk about how much all of this costs, because I think that that's an important piece of the story. But before I do that, I'm going to pick your doctor brain a little bit, because there are people listening who are still just at the very beginning of this journey, and there are terms that have been used by you, and I'm grateful that you've used them, but maybe need some clarification so people understand a little bit more about egg quality once eggs have been fertilized and things like that. And then, so, I mean, you use the phrase low level mosaic, and I don't know that most people necessarily know off the top. What does that mean? Like, I guess people kind of assume that you have eggs, you fertilize the eggs, and if the eggs are healthy, they'll grow into humans and be birthed. And that isn't always the case. It isn't necessarily the case. Can you qualify that a little bit to explain it for people?
Definitely. I think it was even new to me, even as a physician, that I had learned a lot about the egg retrieval process and how that ends up working out. Because when you think about it, you think eggs are extracted, they're fertilized, they become embryos, and then you implant them. But it's not as straightforward as that. So essentially, you would undergo a protocol or undergo hormone injections for a few weeks, and the intent of that is to grow your eggs in your ovaries or your follicles. And when those start to grow, each follicle contains an oocyte, or which is an egg. and multiple of them grow at the same time because you're using multiple hormone injections. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when you have the extraction procedure, you want to get as many number of eggs as possible. And the reason being is you're going to go through different stages, and I'll explain the stages in a bit, but you go through different stages where that number starts to dwindle down. So you may have 20 eggs or 30 eggs, but you may only end up with 2 or 3 normal embryos, right? So breaking down that process, so let's say you get 20 eggs during your extraction procedure. Out of those 20 eggs, maybe only 17 to 18 are viable to be fertilized with the sperm. And so at that time, the sperm combined with those 17 to 18 eggs, and you watch them become embryos. So you'll get an update at I believe, day 0, 1, 3, and 5. So every other day. And they just tell you how your embryos are growing. So out of those, let's say 17 eggs that fertilized, maybe only 15 became embryos. And so you're going to watch it each day in day 1. And then when you reach day 3, that's usually a pretty critical point where, majority of your embryos that grow until that point will likely be your number at that stage. So let's say out of those 15, you've been watching them, and about 12 of them become embryos that are going to be frozen. And day 5 is usually when they're frozen. At that time, genetic testing is also done if you choose to pursue that. Now, genetic testing is the most common one that's out there is called the PGTA genetic test, which looks at the chromosome numbers and the chromosome pairs, which is your genetic material. Essentially, what you're looking for is normal number of 23 pairs of chromosomes. So if there's any missing chromosome or there's an extra chromosome in any of those embryos, likely that they will implant or lead to a pregnancy is very low. And so a little biopsy is done of each of the embryos before they're frozen, and you get your results typically about 3 weeks after they're frozen. Now, if let's just say you're down to those 12 embryos, out of those 12 embryos after genetic testing, if you're very lucky, maybe 10 to 11 of them might be all normal. If you're not that lucky, like what happened with us, we had 10 embryos, we only had one low-level mosaic, then you might have to do another cycle. Now, to kind of describe what the mosaics mean, so you have a normal euploid embryo. Euploid means there's a normal amount of chromosomes in the embryo, and there wasn't any abnormalities, there's no missing or additional. Then the other two embryo genetic result that you may get is something called a low-level mosaic and a high-level mosaic.
Okay.
Now, a low-level mosaic is when there is a chromosomal abnormality, but it's only affecting about 20 to 30% of the cells.
Okay.
And then you can also get a high-level mosaic, which means almost, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's about 70 to 80% of the cells are abnormal with that specific abnormal chromosome in there. So you could be missing a chromosome, you could have an additional one. Now, the difference between a low-level and a high-level mosaic is that evidence shows that you can still implant the low-level mosaic embryo, as there's a chance that the normal cells can outgrow the abnormal cells, which tends to happen. With the high-level mosaic, the chances are very slim, and so many patients and even specialists prefer not to use any high-level mosaics. So you do have a chance with a low-level mosaic, but obviously compared to a normal euploid embryo with normal chromosomes, the chances are a little bit less, but not significantly less, just a little bit less. So many physicians will still recommend trying that if that's kind of like your last resort.
Hold on for just a moment. We'll be right back. You know about babyREADY because you're listening to this podcast, so you know that we are all about queer family planning and helping you have the family of your dreams. But did you know that we don't abandon you once your baby arrives? We actually offer parenting coaching as well. And that's not just for the newborn phase, although we are there for that, but it's through toddlerhood and young children, tweens, and even through the teen years. When you need someone unbiased to lend an ear so that they can hear where your struggles truly are and help you come up with a path and a plan that feels truly right for you and your individual family, don't hesitate to reach out. We are always happy to be there for you. Visit us at www.babyready.info for more information. Thank you for explaining that, because I think that people hear conversations, even the two of you, when you're on your journey and you're talking to other people who've been down the path, maybe they're a couple of steps ahead of you, or they already have children and they're talking about their egg donor and their egg retrieval and PGTA testing and all kinds of things like that. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, what is all of this?
Mhm.
It can be helpful to have somebody slow down for just a minute and remember, because we forget, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I go to a birth and I remember, because I've been to hundreds of them, that birth unfolds like this. But the person that I'm with, if they're doing it for the first time, they don't know what comes next. How can
Yeah.
they possibly know if they've never lived that experience? So just thank you for taking the time to step away from your own story for just a moment to explain that a little bit. But I did say I wanted to learn a little bit more about cost, because I mean, again, full transparency, you and I were connected because someone in your community who I know and have had the chance to get to know over the last few years is a financial advisor, and they're critical for, especially for members of the queer community, when we're thinking about family creation and how much it's going to cost. How do we plan for this? When do we start planning for it? Truthfully, we should be probably starting to plan for this as soon as we get our first job, but
Yeah.
we just don't know. We just didn't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. The financial expenses to, IVF and surrogacy are quite high up there. And I always say, always shoot for the higher number rather than expecting the lower number. And I think that's what we did. We weren't really prepared for the higher numbers or the worst case scenarios. And sort of all of the worst case scenarios happened to us, which was like the multiple IVFs and the multiple surrogacy transfers. So it is quite a big of a range.
I think the other thing is because you get them tested and you think, oh, everything's going perfect, that it should work straight away. I think that's something you should get out of. Some people are very lucky and the first time it works.
Sure.
But majority of the times it does take a few tries. And I think one thing, I don't know if depending, I guess, on which clinic you choose, but some of them have like an all-inclusive package. I think in hindsight, we probably would have been better off taking that, because we may have not have had to spend as much. But in the moment and kind of on our our initial understanding of surrogacy was very different to what we know now. We would definitely choose that option if we were to repeat this process again.
I definitely agree with that, because you can be very optimistic going into this and think the best case scenario is going to happen to you and you're going to save lots and lots of money. But then if it goes the other way, it really does take a financial burden on you as well. And that's something we kind of had to learn the hard way. But, I would say, so based on an average, I would say an average person going through this procedure. So if you're going to be doing IVF and surrogacy, IVF typically ranges anywhere from $12,000 to $16,000 for a cycle to extract eggs and create your embryos. Some clinics will include your first transfer in that package as well. And then you do also have to factor in about medications, so another $3,000 to $4,000 of just medications. Typically, they're not usually covered by OHIP unless you have an insurance company, and if the egg donor bills it through their own insurance company is another avenue to try to save on expenses there. But just really depends on your situation. You should still budget for it. So I would say about 20,000 would be a good number just to kind of budget for an IVF cycle. And then the first IVF extraction may not work. So, and I would say an average person usually goes under 2 IVF cycles typically. So I would say 40,000 for that. And then budgeting about $2,000 to $3,000 for legal fees as well is important, because the legal fees do add up as well. If you're finding an egg donor, you have to pay for the egg donor's legal fees and your own legal fees, so that does add up as well. And that typically is around, I would say, an average of 5,000 for both. Just really varies as well. So, 45,000 to 50,000, I would say, just kind of looking at the IVF aspects of things. And then for surrogacy, so per transfer, I believe anywhere from 2 to 5,000 each time. And then medications included. So let's say if you're doing a transfer cycle, and you're paying for medications, we budget around 5,000 for that. An average person usually takes about 2 to 3 transfer cycles for an embryo to stick, so you want to factor that in. So about, I would say, 15,000. And then to reimburse, because it is illegal to pay surrogates any compensation or money, you can only reimburse any of their expenses related to surrogacy. And so that averages probably another 50,000 on average for time off work, sick leave, bed rest, medications, childcare, surrogacy clothing, etc., and postpartum care as well. So I would budget 50 for that. So 50 plus 15 is about 65 to 70 for surrogacy, and about 45 to 50 for IVF. So on average, I would say, most people are looking at around, I'm just doing quick math here, 120, 130 for the whole process. The good news is that Ontario, I believe it's been a pretty recent thing that IVF and now surrogacy expenses are tax deductible. So that does help with some savings there to get some money back at the year end. And then the other thing that I want to make sure viewers out there are aware of is the OHIP funded IVF cycles. So if you qualify for it, your first IVF cycle, your OHIP, there is a waiting period for it though. On average, I believe it's about 2 years. So if that's something that you are considering and finances are not the greatest, and you need to save where you can, I would recommend signing up for that as soon as possible and applying for it. The only caveat to that, being a same-sex male couple, is it doesn't work in your favor, because unfortunately you do need to have both an egg donor and a surrogate written on the application. Otherwise it won't be approved. I could be wrong, but it is something that I feel like, needs to change in our system. It's very unfair. So that's why we couldn't apply for it, because it's very, very hard to find someone who is going to donate their eggs, but then also, carry your child for you as well. It's hard to find, and if they're 2 different people, it's hard to find someone willing to sign a contract with you if you don't have embryos yet. Right. So you're stuck in both ways. And so it is harder for same-sex male couples to, get approved for that funding unless your egg donor is also going to be carrying your child for you.
Right. And traditional surrogacy is just not very common.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, and that's the hard part. It is true that as many steps forward as we feel sometimes that we've taken, there are still so many steps that we have yet to take. And that lottery system for IVF cycles and fertility cycles is absolutely part of that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there things that you wish that you knew before this all started that you wish somebody had just taken the time to tell you about, and that you would make sure you told people before they started down the path?
Yeah, I would say,
it would be, I surprisingly, I did have some family members who actually went through similar journeys, although them being, a heterosexual couples, but I just think we were just a little bit blindsided with the fact that we had a dream and thought it would be very straightforward, and that financially we're very secure, and it would have, like, if we put the money in, that it would work, and because we weren't prepared necessarily especially for the previous 18 months prior to Aviana being a successful transfer, I felt like we weren't as prepared for that impact on our mental health, on our relationship, and kind of also understanding like what our options were. We kind of only knew a few options at that time. And so I think for me, that was, I'm very grateful for him, because I think if it wasn't for him, I'd be totally lost in this whole process. And I tell that to everyone. I was like, it's easier when there's someone in the dynamic that has a medical understanding.
Right.
Because to be honest, it's the average Joe like me. I don't know how I would pursue this on my own. And then the financial side, it's I can understand why it puts a lot of same-sex couples from even doing this process, because it is very financially hard. And we've had to take sacrifices from projects around the house or going on vacation. But at the end of the day, she's totally worth it. And, when she smiles, all those kind of problems kind of just go away, because the life you bring into this dynamic is worth it. It has no price on it. It's
priceless. And I think just to add to that, like Dips was saying, being prepared. If you're an optimist like me, just becoming, just preparing yourself for every possible, avenue that your journey may take. It may not be straightforward as much as you're hoping it to be. And I think that's the biggest advice I would give. The other thing would be, making sure that, you're financially prepared, you connected with a financial advisor, you have a plan for, what the next few years would look like. And then the other thing I would say is, really connecting on Facebook groups, because I really didn't realize how much support and how you can actually meet and connect with people through these Facebook groups, surrogacy groups, egg donor groups, and just general, like, fathers undergoing IVF and surrogacy. Like, it's a good resource. They're all out there. And people are happy to help you. That's another thing I've realized as well, that when you go through such a tough process, because you went through it, you want to help other people get there at the end of the day as well. And so there's a lot of people like me that are out there that are willing to help. And I've had people reach out to me, and I've always been, willing to kind of help out and explain as much as I can. But, if you have any friends who have gone through the IVF and surrogacy process, reach out to them, connect with them before you start. It's very important to kind of get that, get their firsthand experience as well. And, I think, connecting yourself with the resources is definitely a good idea before you start.
And I think it would be helpful it's easier in bigger cities like Toronto, where there probably are like groups that can meet in person and share knowledge, and also the kind of education as well on the process itself, understanding what the different embryo types are, and classifications. Those things that I think are really important for the IPs or the intended parents to know, because some of these doctors will just say these numbers and you're like, ooh, goes straight over your head. So actually, being prepared, having that kind of resource available would be great. Fortunately, we live in a very small town. It's far for us to get into Toronto on a regular basis. So there is a feel of a lack of resource, I find, up here. But if you have that nearby and you live in the city, and you have access, highly recommend you use that.
Yep.
And like Robbie said, I think the Facebook groups have been,
Yeah.
we've heard lots of stories as well. And it has helped, in understanding and sharing experiences.
And I think the other thing, before I forget, is really trusting the process, but then also advocating for yourself. Because,
Right.
if you don't advocate for yourself by, requesting copies of results and knowing what's going on and asking questions and scheduling those follow-ups with your physician or specialist to kind of discuss what went wrong, what could we do next time, is so, so crucial. I can't emphasize that enough, because you can get in the habit of just being like, okay, well, this process is really overwhelming. I'm just going to let them, transfer or do the protocols, and and you can kind of get wrapped up in that as well. But it is so important to ask the questions, ask the tough questions, get clarifications on everything that you need, and really do advocate for yourself. And that is something I've learned through this process as well.
Oh, that's very true. And quite honestly, I mean, that you saying that as a physician says a lot about how you obviously treat your patients. You expect them to advocate for themselves as well. You want the best for them. But if you see a care member or a care team that doesn't encourage you to advocate for yourself, then perhaps the decision should be made to find a different care team that does want to support you on that path. Because you're right, this is your body.
Yeah.
And this is the body of someone you've asked to do something for you in the case of surrogacy. So and egg donation. So you want to be able to make sure that it's a symbiotic relationship, that there's mutual respect all the way around, right?
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Your patients are lucky.
No.
I'll just say that. I've never seen you work as a doctor, but I have had the chance to chat with you. And like I say, you saying that means a lot about how you must practice as a physician.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Before I let you get back to your sweet wee girl, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wish that we would today, or any other message you wanted to share with listeners?
I think the biggest thing is, as tough as it gets, don't give up. Take the breaks when needed, definitely, because, it is easy to kind of just keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. But then the breaks are very necessary for your own mental health.
Yeah.
But don't give up, because look at where we're at. We went through 4 IVF cycles. We went through 4 transfers with the first egg, and then 2, so 6 transfer cycles. And 2.5 years later, here we are with our baby girl, and it was all worth it, and we didn't give up. So if you're struggling, my advice for you is, try and stay optimistic, but also make sure that you're taking care of your mental health and taking those necessary breaks as well from the process.
Yeah, to be honest, I can't add further to that. I think that was the key thing there for us, is if we didn't take that break, I think we would have been in a very different situation now. Sure. And then once that baby comes into the world and your life, everything's forgotten.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. I sign off every episode like this. Tell me, what is your very, very favorite part so far of parenting this sweet girl?
I think my favorite part would be, seeing her smile every morning, and then that end of day cuddle that she gives us and hugs us and just makes all of your worries and all of your stress go away with that one little, feeling and touch. So yeah.
And I would second that. I think when she sees your face that first thing in the morning, as tired as she is, as stretchy as she wants to get stretched, she'll give you that smile, and it really sets the day off on the right foot.
Yeah, that sounds pretty right. I want to thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to chat with me today and share your story for the listeners who still have yet to embark on this journey, and they just are gathering as much information as they possibly can. Thank you both.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining me today on the Becoming Baby Ready podcast. If you have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who might, if you're a professional who works in the capacity of helping people start and grow their families, and you identify as being a part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community yourself, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We always have room for more stories to share, and there's always more learning to do.